Hey, what's going on? I'm Jimmy, and today I'm going to show you how to make ambient music in Reason. Pretty sure this is an F sharp major. So we just started out with these chords. I ended up using Polytone. This is one of my favorite plugins in Reason. I just hit the file directory just over here to browse the patches, and I ended up narrowing it down. I think I went to like synth, down to pads, and just narrowed it down. Generally, when I'm starting out with like ambient music, I'll just lay down some chords just to build like some kind of like background, and I'll just have that playing like on loop, and I'll just like surf through like a lot of presets until I find something that I like. Another really effective way I think is to browse through the patches until I find something that has like a nice sort of tone to it, and then even if the envelope's like, you know, maybe the attack's a little bit slow or something, then just go in and like adjust the ADSR depending on how it will fit better in the mix. So anyway, I found this preset, and then I just went with this like MK2 reverb, and then it was a little bit like kind of muddy. So I just threw on this EQ, and then we took out a bit like around 300 hertz where it just sounded like a little bit muddy. And then I also had these notes playing over the top. They were part of the pad, but I just separated them as elements just so I had a little bit more control over sort of these melodic notes versus the chords. I knew that I wanted the chords to like sit further back in the mix, and I was happy to have the chords sort of like buried, whereas I wanted these notes to be a little more easy to differentiate. So if we go into the melody, I just reuse the same devices for effects, but I slightly tweaked the pre-delay just to push this one like just in a different area, like spatially in the mix. This was still muddy, so I just kept the EQ on that. That was about it. I'm pretty sure if we go over to the mixer, I may have like, I just panned this one 31 to the right, and then the chords was like to the left. That's what I mean when I say I just wanted a little bit more control over the two. Like they're obviously the same style of sound, pretty much the same sound, but just separating them just sort of enables you to position them how you want in the mix. And then I just laid down like a simple bass line, just reusing the root notes from those chords. I knew I just wanted something that was like really subby and just really simple, so that it could just like be a solid foundation in this like sort of track. I end up using Subtractor. This is another really great like synthesizer that's native to Reason, and I just preset surfed. I think I went with like soft basses or something. To start off with, it was very subby, so I end up throwing on this like Audiomatic. This is always really great to just kind of like beef up sounds or sort of add some harmonics to like melodies and things like that, just to make them sound a little bit more like organic and natural. For this sub, I just wanted it to be a little bit more like aggressive and a little bit more audible in this mix. So I just put this on here and just kind of dialed it in. It's a pretty easy to use plugin, and it ended up sounding really great. So on top of those three layers, I sort of see them as like the foundation of it. So I wanted to lay down something a little bit more interesting on top of those ideas. So I went with these two. Something that's really important to me in music is creating like a call and response. Whenever I do that, it sort of seems to make like anything kind of come to life. So I used two different synths for this. Essentially, we've got the call here, and then this is the response, and it plays throughout. For this first synth, I went with polytone and I used this preset. Just sounded really good, and then I wanted to give it kind of like a digital kind of sounding texture, so I just went with the Audiomatic again and just used the circuit setting, which is kind of like bit reduction. And then I threw on the Ripley. I find this is like super easy in terms of ambient, but this is so easy. It's such a go-to of mine to sort of create an environment and really like position any element in your mix like how you want it to. There's a reason why this is like so popular. It's got a lot of parameters which are quite helpful as well, like in helping you achieve that. So yeah, I find this really fun to play around with. It's kind of like one go-to plugin, but it's like you've got the delay and you've got the reverb, you've got a couple of different types of distortion, you've got noise. So yeah, it's a really good like go-to all in one. So if we go to the response, which is this sort of second section, I use the preset progressive pluck, and then I just tweaked it a little when I was kind of like piecing this composition together. Sometimes ideas just kind of fly and you just want to like throw some effects on there. I find this like digital delay line really easy to go to, like it's just a very simple device. So I just slapped this on, I think it's like a 4/4 delay. I find myself coming to this because it's just a very simple plugin and it's really easy to get the result that you want. So I kind of just threw that on, and then I use this reverb again, this MK2 reverb, which I used on the chords earlier. I think it was the same preset as the chords. Once again, this is just kind of the same as the delay line. Like it's just a very easy plugin to just throw on there and then just tweak a few parameters just to get like the desired result that you're after. So that's kind of what I did and what I do like nearly every time when I'm sort of creating like a melody, and then I'll go back through and just tweak some of the parameters just to make them fit a little bit more, or just to make them sound a little more cohesive in the mix. You can also see the dry wet has this green box around it, and same with the dry wet on this reverb as well. With this box around it, if you right click, you can edit the automation. So I just automated the dry wet, and this is the automation lanes. If we zoom right in on these two, these are my automation. So this is just the dry wet of the delay and the dry wet of the reverb, and I'm just sort of ramping them up just to sort of create like a little bit more like intensity and just a little bit more like motion throughout the mix as it sort of progresses. And then it moves on to this sort of like B section. It just sort of creates like a little more excitement and a little more engagement right up until we like cross over to the B section. Automation is your best friend. It's definitely something super fun to play around with, and I feel like when I'm feeling a little bit like stagnant in my mind and I play around with automation, it kind of like, it's such an icebreaker in terms of like it'll get me out of being like a lazy producer and get me like under the hood and really like tweaking things and listening with my ears properly. So I feel like that's a really big hack, just going in and like automating stuff and forcing yourself to kind of like listen to what the changes do to your sound. And then I just put in a few samples here, just something I had in my like sample library. I just kind of drowned it in reverb, and then I threw on the Audiomatic as well on the bright setting. So essentially this kind of distortion was just sort of acting as like a compressor for me, just like a really harsh form of compression. I was just trying to like mash the sample with the reverb, so that's why I put it at the end of the reverb, just in order to make the sound really big. And then I also had these just these little risers that are a little more subtle. They definitely help with like bridging the gap between the two sections. So there's that one. Then I just copied it across. They're actually longer than that, but I did this thing where I just kind of cut them off, and then I can like copy and like duplicate another one over here, and I might use it like over in this section, this next section. But see, it looks a little bit different if you look at them, because I just placed it differently and like kind of chopped it off a little bit differently, just so that you hear something different every time, and you might not even notice it, but it just makes it a little bit more interesting, sounds a little bit more natural. So for the next section, I took out the call and response. I left that sort of like foundation still in there, which was the chords, sort of just like a simple melody over the top, and then just a bass line. But then I also threw in this lead that I made. So if we go over to the rack again, so this is a lead I made. It was using Maelstrom. I started off by using like this Amazonas bass. I don't know, I think that's how you say it. We're not using this delay, it's just in bypass. So it's got a delay and it's got a reverb, and then I'm using the sidechain tool at like a quarter note, and then right on the end we're using Scream 4, which is a distortion. So similar to the percussion that I just showed you, we're creating like this huge kind of like spatial environment with the delay and the reverb. And then I'm using this sidechain as like a gate, which creates this kind of like pumping, like intensive like pumping sound. And then on the end of it, I'm putting distortion, like some pretty heavy distortion, which just like makes it sound quite aggressive. So that's just a preset that I just kind of made and added to the combinator. Mixed in with that, you're also hearing this clap sound that I got from a sample pack. I think it's a Cashmere sample pack, just like a white noise clap, very EDM. And then we've sort of got these this secondary melody, I guess it's called a B section. I took the initial chords that we had, and then I just like created a melody over the top. So the B section is in Thor. I use the preset A New Blade, and then I also just use this like this delay line, which is most likely what I said when I'm just trying to kind of shape the sound. I just reach for whatever gets the result the quickest, and it's usually the simple plugins. That one ends up sounding like this. So that's the whole kind of like idea that I made. If we go over to the mixer, so then at the very end, I just kind of like went through and mixed all these down, panned them how I wanted, like accordingly. And then I just went up the top and I used this like SSL kind of like comp master compressor. These are kind of like my settings. I had it set to a ratio of 4, really slow attack, but then I did like an auto release. And I just want it to just be like kind of dancing around here, like just between 1 and 3 dB, just enough so that it's like just ever slightly just pushing the mix together, you know? So you can see there it's just ever slightly moving, just enough just to, you know, glue all the elements together just a little bit. Dare I say that word, but you know, that's what I mean. So that's how I make ambient music in Reason. I hope you took something away from the video. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.